She spent years trapped in a toxic relationship, losing herself piece by piece. But one day, she chose freedom and began to rebuild her life. Welcome to Echoes of the Past. Subscribe, like, and share. More powerful stories are on the way. If someone had told me 10 years ago that the man I loved more than anything would one day become the reason I couldn't breathe, I would have laughed. I would have looked them straight in the eyes and said, "You don't know him like I do." Because back then, Daniel was my everything. We met in college. He was charismatic in that quiet, confident way that makes you feel like the most important person in the room. He wasn't loud or flashy, but when he spoke, people listened. And when he looked at me, I melted. It wasn't the kind of love that hits you like a storm. It was slow and steady, like the feeling of stepping into warm sunlight after a long winter. I was 24 when we got serious. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings, remember the name of my childhood cat, text me goodnight even after the worst days. My friends adored him. My mom said he was marriage material. And honestly, I agreed. At the time, I was just starting my career in marketing. I was ambitious, maybe even a little intense. Daniel liked that about me, or at least he said he did. "You've got fire," he'd say, pulling me close. "Just don't let the world burn you out." He made me feel like I could do anything. I used to think he was the wind beneath my wings. Turns out, he was quietly clipping them. There were little things, moments that didn't sit right, but I brushed them off. Like the time I went out with my coworkers after a campaign launch, and he called me 3 times in an hour just to check in, or the way he raised an eyebrow whenever I wore something that showed too much. He'd never say, "You can't wear that," but he didn't need to. That one look was enough. Back then, I saw it as care. He worried because he loved me. He asked questions because he wanted to protect me. At least, that's what I told myself. I remember one night, about a year into dating, when we were curled up on his couch. We had just watched some documentary about crime in big cities, and I joked about moving to New York someday. He grew quiet. Then he turned to me and said, "I just don't want you in a place like that. It's not safe. You don't know what kind of people are out there." I laughed it off. "Daniel, it's just a dream." But his tone was firm. "Dream of something else." That night stuck with me. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Not angry, not even mean. Just final. Like the matter was closed. Still, I told myself it was love. That real love meant compromise. That maybe I didn't need to be in a city that big, that loud. Maybe I could find my happiness in a quieter life. A life with him. Looking back now, I see it differently. I see a girl, me, slowly folding herself into a shape that fit someone else's idea of love. But at the time, I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. The shift wasn't sudden. That's the thing about emotional control. It doesn't slam into you like a car crash. It's more like a slow leak. You don't even notice it at first. You just start feeling smaller, quieter. Daniel and I moved in together about 2 years into our relationship. At first, it was exciting. We picked out furniture together, painted the bedroom a soft gray, and hung Polaroids of our road trip to Oregon along the hallway wall. It felt like we were building something real, something permanent. But once we shared the same space, the air began to change. At first, it was subtle. I'd get home from work a little later than usual, and he'd greet me with, "Rough day?" But there was something behind it, like a test, like he already knew the answer and was waiting to see if I'd lie. If I said yes, he'd press. With who? You never mentioned a late meeting. If I said no, he'd tilt his head. So you just decided not to come home? There was no winning, just the slow realization that being late meant interrogation. So I stopped staying late, stopped grabbing drinks with coworkers, stopped doing anything that might make him ask questions I didn't want to answer. Then came the issue with my friends. At first he loved them, but gradually he began pointing out their flaws. Sarah was too loud. Mia talked too much about herself. My best friend Jordan, who I'd known since high school, was just using me, according to him. One night I had plans to go out with Jordan for her birthday. Daniel didn't say no. He just looked at me from the kitchen table and said, "I thought we were going to have a night in. I bought that wine you like." His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed, heavy, like I'd let him down. I canceled, told Jordan I wasn't feeling well, and I remember the smile on Daniel's face when I hung up the phone. It wasn't big, just a small, satisfied curve at the corner of his mouth, like a box had been checked. That smile haunted me for weeks. Over time, the walls of my world started closing in. My social life dried up. He said things like, "I just don't get why you need to go out when we have everything here." And at the time, it felt almost logical. Why go out when I had love at home? Why dress up when I already had someone who adored me? But adoration started to feel like surveillance. He had a way of framing everything as care. "I just want to know where you are so I don't worry. I just ask because I love you. I only get upset because I miss you." But love shouldn't feel like a GPS tracker, and care shouldn't sound like a guilt trip. I started waking up anxious, checking my phone before I even opened my eyes, just to make sure I hadn't missed a text. I timed my grocery runs. I made excuses not to attend work events. I told myself it was easier this way, easier than having to explain why I needed a life outside of him. And through it all, I kept pretending we were okay. I posted pictures of us smiling on weekends, captioned them with hearts and little inside jokes. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple, and maybe that was the worst part, knowing that even I had started believing the lie. I didn't realize it then, but I was already disappearing. They say that silence can be peaceful, a sign of comfort, safety. But with Daniel, silence was a warning, a weapon. It started with little things. When he didn't like what I said, he'd just stop talking. No argument, no raised voice, just cold air. He'd walk out of the room, leave the conversation hanging in the space like unfinished laundry, and I'd be left wondering what I'd done wrong. The first few times, I chased after him, apologized, even when I wasn't sure what for. I thought, if I can just explain better, he'll understand. He'll come back. But explanations didn't work. He didn't want to understand. He wanted compliance. He began using silence the way some people use storms, to make everything stop. If I forgot to text when I arrived somewhere, silence. If I wore something he thought was a bit much, silence. If I asked too many questions about where he'd been, silence, followed by a look that made me feel like I'd just broken something fragile. The worst part? That silence didn't scream. It whispered that I was the problem, that my feelings were inconvenient, that love meant shutting up and smoothing things over. And I listened. I got quieter, softer, smaller. I stopped bringing up things that upset me, like the way he'd casually belittle me in front of his friends. "Oh, Claire's not good with directions. She'd get lost in a shopping mall," he once laughed, as they all chuckled. I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Tell the truth? That I felt invisible? There was a moment I remember vividly. I had just gotten a small promotion at work. Nothing huge, but I was proud, excited. I told Daniel over dinner. His reaction? A quick nod. Cool. That was it. No hug, no smile, no pride. Later that night, I found him on the balcony, smoking a cigarette. He didn't even smoke. I asked what was wrong. He shrugged, said, "Nothing. You just seem really into yourself lately." That one sentence, it crushed me. Suddenly, my joy was arrogance. My ambition was selfishness. From that point on, I stopped sharing the good things. I didn't want to risk dimming his light with my own. I learned how to exist without taking up space, how to be agreeable, supportive, quiet. I started second-guessing everything: what I wore, how I laughed, even how I walked. I once replayed an entire evening in my head because I thought I'd said too much at dinner. He hadn't said anything, but the way he looked at me, like I was too much, that stayed with me. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized myself. Not just physically, although I'd lost weight, but deeper than that, like the essence of me was evaporating. My spark, my voice, my fire, gone. And still, I stayed. Because I thought love meant sacrifice. That being a good partner meant bending, adapting, compromising. I didn't realize I was slowly erasing myself to make him more comfortable. It didn't feel like abuse. It felt like confusion. It felt like walking through fog every day, unsure if I was crazy or just sensitive, unsure if I was overreacting or finally seeing things clearly. But the worst part wasn't the silence between us. It was the silence inside me. I used to tell myself he was just protective, that he cared too much, that maybe he just loved me in a different way, a deeper, more intense way. It's wild what your mind can convince you of when you're trying to survive something you can't name. It started with my phone. One night, Daniel saw a message pop up from an old college friend. Harmless, just a meme and a quick, "How have you been?" He didn't yell, didn't accuse, just calmly asked, "Why is he texting you at 10 p.m.?" I explained. Laughed even. "He's just an old friend. It's not like that." Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know I trust you," he said. "It's just guys like that. They don't just want to be friends." The next day, I blocked the number. I wasn't even asked to. I just did it, to show him he didn't have to worry, to prove I was loyal. That's how it always went. Little choices that weren't really choices. Little sacrifices that seemed like love, but were actually submission. He didn't forbid me from seeing people. He'd just say things like, "You always come home so different after hanging out with them," or, "I feel like they don't really get you like I do." And I'd believe him, because I wanted peace, because I was tired of defending myself over nothing. Over time, my circle shrank. First it was my guy friends, then some of the girls, the ones who spoke their minds, who asked questions. He said they were a bad influence, that they encouraged me to be selfish. So I stopped answering their messages. Slowly, I disappeared from group chats, stopped showing up to birthdays. I even skipped a wedding, told the bride I was sick. I wasn't. I just knew Daniel would pout all weekend if I went without him. He never said no. He just made it so uncomfortable to say yes. His version of care was suffocating. If I went to the store alone, he'd call, not once, but 3, 4 times. "Just checking in," he'd say. "Just worried something happened." When I didn't pick up fast enough, he'd say I made him feel abandoned. So I started moving faster, always answering, always updating. He framed it as love. "I just love you so much, Claire. I need to know you're safe." It sounded sweet, until I realized I wasn't even allowed to walk my own street without checking in. One evening, I told him I might pick up an evening yoga class again, something I used to love. His face shifted. "Why would you want to do that now?" he asked. "I miss it," I said. "It helped me clear my head." He looked at me for a long moment. Then, "I just think you're already so busy. And don't you want to spend that time with me? We barely see each other as it is." Just like that, I dropped it. Because arguing over yoga seemed ridiculous. And because deep down, I already knew how that conversation would end. Me apologizing for wanting something of my own. That was the pattern. Any attempt to reclaim a part of my life was framed as betrayal, as if loving myself was disloyal to him. But the worst moment came on a rainy Thursday. I had forgotten to plug in my phone the night before, and it died on my way home from work. When I finally got home, Daniel was pacing in the kitchen, his face pale and wild-eyed. I barely got a word out before he exploded. "Where the hell have you been?" I'd never seen him like that. His voice shook, his fists clenched. I thought he was going to hit the wall, or me. I explained, showed him my dead phone. He didn't listen. "You made me feel like I didn't matter," he yelled. "Like you don't even think about me." That night, I cried harder than I had in years. But not because he scared me, because I felt guilty. I felt like I'd done something wrong. That's how deep it went. I was more afraid of upsetting him than of losing myself. I didn't realize it yet, but he wasn't protecting me. He was isolating me, and I was almost too far gone to see it. I don't remember the exact moment I stopped loving him. Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was 100 little ones, paper cuts, too small to notice at first, until one day I was bleeding out and couldn't understand why. But I do remember the moment I knew I had to leave. It started like any other evening. Daniel was in the living room, scrolling through his phone while I cooked. I had picked up a bottle of wine, a cheap red I liked, and a little box of chocolate truffles. Something simple, something just for me. When I set them on the counter, he looked up. "What's that for?" he asked. I smiled. "Nothing. Just felt like treating myself today." He stood up slowly. "So, you had money for this, but not for the organic coffee I wanted last week?" I froze. The wine was $7, the chocolate, maybe 5. But in his eyes, it wasn't about the price. It was the principle, the fact that I had made a choice without him. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "You get things for yourself all the time." Daniel laughed, that low, sarcastic kind of laugh that makes your stomach twist. "So now we're keeping score?" I didn't answer, because I knew how this would go. He'd twist it until I was the selfish one, until I was apologizing for wanting a treat after a long day. But this time, I didn't want to play the part. That scared me, because the minute I stopped bending, he started breaking. For the next few days, he was cold, distant, barely speaking. Every time I walked into the room, he'd sigh, or mutter something under his breath, or just stare at his phone, ignoring me completely. And I did what I always did, tried to fix it. I cooked his favorite meals. I complimented him. I offered to watch whatever he wanted. And still, nothing. Finally, on a Saturday night, I asked him what was wrong. He looked at me like I was stupid. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said. "You used to care what I thought. Now you just do whatever you want." I felt a strange heat rise in my chest. Not shame, not guilt. Something else. Anger. "I do care what you think," I said slowly. "But I also care what I think. That shouldn't be a crime." Daniel's face darkened. "You've changed," he snapped. "You used to be grateful. You used to be good to me." That word. Used to. As if who I am now is someone less worthy. That was the moment something cracked. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I fell in love with. I saw someone who needed me to be small, someone who didn't want a partner, just a reflection of himself. Later that night, I went into the bathroom and locked the door behind me. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, shaking. Not from fear, but from realization. I didn't feel safe. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I felt like a guest in my own skin. That's when I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed a sentence I'd never dared to write before. "I want to leave." Just 4 words, but they lit something inside me. The next morning, I opened a private browser and searched for apartments. Just looking, nothing serious. But that tiny act felt rebellious, dangerous, freeing. Of course, Daniel noticed. He always noticed. He came up behind me while I was checking my email and saw a tab still open, a Craigslist listing for a studio downtown. "What is this?" he asked, his voice too calm. My blood turned to ice. "I was just curious," I said. "It's nothing." I swear he didn't say anything, just stared. Then he smiled. But it was cold, controlled. "You know," he said softly, "if you ever tried to leave me, you'd regret it." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing. And all I could think was, he doesn't love me. He owns me. I didn't leave the next day, or the next. People think leaving is a single, clean decision, like snapping a twig in half. But in truth, it's more like pulling a thread from a tangled knot. You tug, and it tightens. You tug again, and it loosens. Over and over, until one day the knot gives way. For me, it took 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of walking on eggshells, of checking my phone in secret, reaching out to shelters, browsing apartment listings, memorizing bus routes. I started packing small things when Daniel wasn't home, little pieces of me hidden in grocery bags and slipped into my car's trunk. My favorite book, my grandmother's ring, a childhood photo of me and my mom. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not even my sister. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I couldn't trust myself. I was terrified that if I said the words out loud, "I'm leaving him," I'd lose the courage to follow through. I waited for the right moment, and then, one night, it came. It was late. Daniel had gone out drinking, something he hadn't done in months. When he stumbled in around 1 a.m., I could tell immediately he was on edge, angry, looking for a fight. He accused me of hiding things from him, of being ungrateful, distant, cold. The same old script, but slurred. And then he shoved a lamp off the table, just like that. No warning, no build-up. The crash echoed through the apartment, glass scattering like shrapnel. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and knew, this is it. This is the last time. He passed out on the couch 20 minutes later, and while he slept, face down, mouth open, snoring, I moved like a ghost through our home. I grabbed the last bag from under the bed, stuffed it with clothes, took my car keys, and slipped out the door. I didn't look back. I drove with the windows down, even though it was cold. I needed the wind on my face, something real to remind me I was still alive. I checked into a cheap motel 2 towns over. The room smelled like bleach and sadness, but I didn't care. It had a lock. It was mine. I collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, and just lay there, staring at the ceiling. And then I laughed. Quiet at first, then harder. Not because it was funny, but because I hadn't heard my own laughter in so long it startled me. The next morning I called my sister. When she picked up and heard my voice, she said, "Oh my God, Claire, are you okay?" I hadn't realized until that moment how long I'd been pretending. How many times I'd said, "Yeah, I'm fine," when I wasn't. But that day, I told her the truth. All of it. And she cried. I cried. We talked for hours. She offered to come get me. I told her I needed a few days alone, not because I didn't want help, but because I wanted to feel this, to sit in my freedom, to know what it meant to choose myself. I found a small apartment the following week, just a studio, one window, a creaky floor, peeling paint. But it was mine. I bought a cheap coffee maker and a single plate. I kept the wine and chocolate on the counter like little trophies. Every night, I lit a candle and let it burn while I wrote in a journal I hadn't touched in years. One entry said, "He didn't break me. He just delayed me." Another said, "You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." Now, months later, I still wake up some days expecting to hear his voice, but I don't. All I hear is the hum of traffic outside, my breath, my heartbeat. The silence that used to terrify me now feels like a song. I'm not healed yet, but healing isn't a destination. It's 1,000 quiet choices, made over and over, to stay, to grow, to rebuild, to believe you deserve better. And now, when I pass by mirrors, I don't flinch. I see a woman who survived, a woman who dared to leave the life that was killing her, a woman who, one ordinary night, finally opened the door and never looked back. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. More powerful stories are coming soon.